you mentioned that there are secular websites that talk about this quite a bit. So I think that's very important to emphasize, because a lot of people really try to pigeonhole this whole issue as something that only religious people, if you're a Catholic or some kind of Mormon or an evangelical Christian, then you're going to be worried about this, but that no rational, enlightened, secular person would have an issue with any of this stuff. Whereas I think you're saying, and I would agree, that there are very good, objective, rational reasons to be opposed to all of this stuff, pornography and everything that comes with it, that it's materially bad. It's not an opinion. It's not a subjective view. It's provable with the data that we have available to us.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the long-term consequences, we have to look at the data. And I know people have their opinions and their views and so forth, and people can say, oh, that's religious or that's secular or whatever. But at the end of the day, if there is a true principle that exists in the world, that this data from society, the sociological data, will begin to expose that general principle. In fact, I met a number of years ago at a think tank in Washington, D.C. I spent the day there meeting with the various department heads in that think tank. And I'll never forget something the head of the sociology department told me. He said, all the data from the social sciences is now showing that even if we had no religion at all and knew nothing about Judeo-Christian morality, the principles of Judeo-Christian morality emerge as out of the data from the social sciences. That is, if a society lives by those principles, they will flourish in every way. If they abandon those principles, that society will eventually disintegrate. And that's just out of the pure secular data from the social sciences. Data has to be taken on the long term, not the short term. The reason I say that is I just had a colleague send me some papers last week on supporting this idea of polyamory and studies that say, well, you'll be as happy with multiple partners, consensual, as you would be with one. And so I started looking at that, and immediately I could see, well, there's a serious problem here. They're basically taking a snapshot out of a person's life. They're looking at them, say, in their 20s or early 30s. Are you happy with multiple consensual partners? And they would have to say yes. But a proper study needs to follow those people for the remainder of their lives, into the 40s, their 50s, their 60s. They need to see what the consequences are for those individuals and those relationships, which the data shows will almost certainly not survive. So you leave behind you a trail of broken relationships. But the other problem will be, you need to look at the consequences for the children arising out of those relationships, and what will be the consequences for them. And again, the data shows it's devastating on the long term.
Absolutely. I've been saying this for the longest time, not just as regards the sexual morality issue, but a whole variety of issues, that if, God forbid, there was a nuclear war tomorrow and the whole of society was leveled and we were back to Mad Max anarchy and we had to rebuild a society from scratch, the only societies that would survive would be quote-unquote traditionalist societies that did things a certain way. Like if you take an issue like, say, border control, if you decide, you know what, we don't need walls around our encampment, we're just going to let whoever they want wander in freely, you're going to be overrun by bandits pretty quickly. I don't think that society is going to last too long. Same with, we could have diversity quotas. Maybe we should have the women go out hunting and fighting our wars and the men can stay at home picking berries. Well, again, that society is going to fall apart pretty quickly for biological reasons, and so on and so forth. That there's, in the end, whichever societies lasted and survived from such a scenario, they would end up looking something like a Christian society, a traditional society, and the kinds of society that we're trying to run away from, the one that we don't want to be like, is the one that will be successful and survive. And the one we're running towards is a kind of a disastrous hellscape, for lack of a better term.